The courtroom went completely silent when I slid the envelope across the polished wooden table and said, "Your Honor, everything inside that envelope happened while my wife was telling this court I abandoned our son." My wife, Rachel, stopped breathing for a second. Her attorney looked down at the envelope as if it were a live grenade. Judge Marcus Hale reached for it slowly, opened the flap, and pulled out the first document. I didn't move. I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. For 6 months, I had listened to Rachel tell everyone that I walked away from our family, that I stopped caring about our 9-year-old son, Noah, and that she had been forced to raise him alone. She had cried on the witness stand. She had described empty birthdays, unpaid bills, lonely nights, and a father who supposedly chose his own life over his child. Every accusation had landed like a hammer, but I had remained silent because I knew there was a reason Rachel wanted the court to believe that version of me. I also knew the truth was sitting inside one plain brown envelope. Judge Hale removed a printed email first, then a bank statement, then a photograph, then a handwritten note with a date written across the top. His expression changed. Rachel whispered, "That's not what it looks like." Her lawyer immediately stood. "Your Honor, we object to the relevance." Judge Hale didn't even look up. "Counsel, I haven't finished reading it." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but my face stayed still. I had spent 20 years learning how to keep emotion from controlling my decisions. Not in court. In another life. A life Rachel knew almost nothing about. She thought my silence meant guilt. She thought every unanswered phone call was proof that I had disappeared. She didn't know that during the months she was building her story, I had been quietly collecting every piece of evidence she thought would never exist. And the first page Judge Hale read contained 3 words that changed the entire case. Payment received. Again. He looked at me over the top of the document. Then he looked at Rachel. "Mr. Carter, when did you receive this?" I answered calmly, "I never received it, Your Honor." Rachel did. The room tightened. Noah sat behind me with my sister Emily, his small hands wrapped around the edge of the bench. He didn't understand every detail, but he understood one thing. His father had not disappeared. I had been right there, watching, waiting. And the question now hanging over that courtroom was simple. If I hadn't abandoned my son, why had Rachel spent 6 months making sure everyone believed I had? 6 months earlier, I had stood in the doorway of our old house while Rachel packed the last of Noah's school clothes into cardboard boxes. The marriage had already been broken for months, although neither of us wanted to admit it. We had stopped talking about the future and started arguing about the past. Rachel, 38, worked in medical administration and had always been organized, controlled, and careful with her words. I had once admired that about her. After our separation, I began seeing a different side of it. She didn't simply remember conversations. She cataloged them. She didn't just disagree. She built cases. When she decided our marriage was over, she didn't leave emotionally first. She left strategically. The house was technically in both our names. Noah's school was close enough that either of us could handle transportation, and our custody arrangement initially appeared straightforward. Alternating weeks, shared expenses, major decisions made together. I agreed to everything because my priority was Noah. I could have fought Rachel over the house. I could have challenged every accusation. I could have turned the divorce into a battlefield. Instead, I signed temporary agreements and concentrated on making sure Noah knew he was loved. Every Tuesday evening, I picked him up. Every Friday morning, I drove him to school. I attended parent meetings. I paid his medical expenses. I kept his favorite cereal in my kitchen. When he lost his first tooth after the separation, he called me before he called anyone else. "Dad, you won't believe what happened." I smiled when I heard his voice. "Try me." But then Rachel started changing the schedule. A Tuesday became Thursday. Thursday became next week. Next week became Noah has homework. Then it became he's tired. Eventually, she began telling Noah that I was busy. That was the first thing that frightened me, not because I was losing time with him, but because someone was slowly rewriting his understanding of why I wasn't there. I started documenting everything, every canceled visit, every missed exchange, every message, every payment. I didn't do it to punish Rachel. I did it because I knew memory becomes unreliable when people are angry, and courts need facts. Then one night, Noah called me from Rachel's phone. His voice was small. "Dad, did you decide not to come?" I sat in my kitchen, staring at the clock. No, buddy. I was there. He was quiet. Mom said you told her you needed space. I closed my eyes. Noah, listen to me. Adults sometimes misunderstand each other, but you never need to worry that I don't want to see you. There was a pause. Then he whispered, "Okay." That single word stayed with me. 3 days later, Rachel's attorney sent a letter accusing me of voluntary parental abandonment. I read it twice, then a third time. The claim was absurd, but absurd accusations can become dangerous when repeated often enough. I responded through my attorney, Daniel Brooks, and attached the visitation records. Rachel countered with screenshots of unanswered messages I had never received. Daniel called me that evening. "David, something doesn't add up." I looked at the wall across from me. "I know, she's creating a paper trail." I asked, "For what?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. "That's what worries me." 2 weeks later, Rachel filed for primary custody and exclusive use of the house. Then she made a statement that changed everything. She told the court I had become emotionally unstable after the separation. She offered no medical evidence, no police report, no professional evaluation, just a story. And suddenly I understood that the fight wasn't only about custody. Rachel was building a narrative in which I had to become the villain before she could claim everything she wanted. The first time I met Judge Marcus Hale, I noticed the clock behind his bench. It was 7 minutes slow. Nobody else seemed to care. I did because I have always noticed small things when people are under pressure. The hearing began at 9 in the morning. Rachel arrived with 2 folders, her attorney, and the expression of someone who believed the outcome had already been decided. I arrived with Daniel and 1 folder of my own. I had no intention of turning the courtroom into a performance. Rachel's attorney began by describing me as absent, unpredictable, financially irresponsible, and emotionally detached. Every word was carefully selected. "Mr. Carter has repeatedly failed to exercise his parenting time." False. "He has contributed inconsistently to household expenses." False. "He has shown little interest in maintaining a stable environment for Noah." Completely false. Daniel objected where necessary, but I kept my hands folded. Rachel eventually took the stand. She cried, real tears. I could see them rolling down her cheeks. She described nights when Noah supposedly asked where I was. She described school events I allegedly skipped. She said she had waited for me to become the father I promised I would be. Then she looked directly at me. "I don't hate David," she said. "I just don't trust him anymore." The courtroom was silent. For a moment, even I almost believed her. Not the accusations, the emotion, because grief can make lies feel real. Daniel leaned toward me. "You okay?" I nodded. "Keep listening." Then Rachel mentioned a bank account. She claimed I had stopped contributing to Noah's expenses. That statement was easy to disprove. I had every transfer, every receipt, every canceled check, but something about the way she mentioned the account made me uneasy. After the hearing, Daniel and I returned to his office. He placed his glasses on the desk. "She knows the financial records exist," I said. "Then why lie?" He looked at me. "Because maybe she thinks we can't get all of them." That night, I went through every financial document I had saved. Mortgage payments, school fees, insurance, childcare, medical bills, transfers to Rachel's account marked for Noah. Everything was there, but then I found something strange. 4 payments had been routed to a different account number. They had not been authorized by me. The amounts were identical. The description said, "family expenses." Daniel checked them the next morning. "This isn't your account." I stared at the statement. "Whose is it?" He ran a record search. The account was connected to a small consulting company, owned by Rachel's cousin, Mark Ellison. Suddenly the picture became larger. Rachel wasn't just claiming I abandoned Noah. Money intended for our son had been moving somewhere else. Daniel told me not to confront her. "If you accuse her now, she'll destroy whatever evidence remains." I nodded. That was the moment I made a decision. I would stop trying to convince Rachel to tell the truth. I would let the records speak for me. Over the next several weeks, I collected everything through proper legal channels: bank statements, school attendance records, medical payment histories, transportation logs, emails, calendar entries. Then came the piece I hadn't expected: a message from Rachel to Mark. It was short. "Once the judge believes he left voluntarily, the house becomes much easier." I read it twice. Then I looked at Daniel. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. We both understood what that sentence meant. Rachel wasn't merely fighting for custody, she was constructing a legal path toward the house, the money, and control of Noah. But there was another sentence beneath it, buried in a longer email chain, and that sentence explained why she was so confident I would remain silent. The next morning, Daniel called me before sunrise. "David, we found more." I drove to his office through cold rain, the windshield wipers moving back and forth like a metronome. He had printed 37 pages and arranged them across a conference table. "These are messages between Rachel and Mark," he said. "Some were obtained through authorized discovery, others came from financial records and archived communications." I read slowly. Rachel had been discussing the house months before she filed for custody. She had been planning to refinance it. She had discussed removing my name from certain documents. She had even spoken about telling the court that I had effectively vacated the property. I looked up. "But I never vacated." Daniel nodded. "That's why we have the utility records. My name remained on the electricity account. My payments were current. My insurance was current. My property taxes were current. I had spent months living elsewhere because Rachel and I had agreed that distance would reduce conflict, but legally and financially, I had never abandoned the property. More importantly, I had never abandoned Noah." Daniel turned another page. "This is the part you need to understand. It was a school attendance report. On 3 dates Rachel claimed Noah was home with her because I had failed to pick him up. But the school's digital check-in showed that I had personally signed him out. The timestamps matched my messages. The contradiction was devastating. Yet I still didn't want revenge. I wanted my son safe. I wanted the court to know the truth." Then Daniel showed me a final document, a private message from Rachel to a friend. "He won't fight back. That's the problem with David. He thinks staying calm makes him honorable." I stared at the sentence for a long time. Maybe she was right about one thing. I had stayed calm, but she had mistaken calm for weakness. There is a difference between surrender and restraint. I had spent years learning that difference. I didn't tell Daniel everything about my past because it wasn't relevant to the custody case. I didn't need a dramatic history. I didn't need to intimidate anyone. I needed evidence. On the day of the second hearing, Rachel arrived smiling. She believed she had momentum. Her attorney presented another statement claiming I had chosen personal freedom over parental responsibility. Then Daniel stood. "Your Honor, we have financial records that directly contradict that claim." Rachel's smile disappeared. The judge reviewed the documents. One by one, the allegations began collapsing. Payments existed. Visits existed. School records existed. Medical records existed. But Rachel wasn't finished. She claimed I had manipulated the records. She accused me of creating false evidence after the separation. That was when Daniel produced the bank's certified records, complete with transaction identifiers and timestamps. Judge Hale looked at Rachel's attorney. "Do you dispute the authenticity?" The attorney hesitated. "Not at this time." I felt Noah's hand touch mine from behind the bench. He whispered, "Dad?" I turned. "I'm here." He nodded. Then Judge Hale asked the question nobody in that courtroom expected. "Mrs. Carter, if these records are accurate, why did you tell the court that Mr. Carter stopped paying for your son?" Rachel looked toward her attorney. Her face had gone pale, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. But fear wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the part she had been trying hardest to hide. 2 days later, Daniel received a call from the bank's compliance department. There was an additional account connected to the same consulting company. It had received payments that matched several of my child support transfers. But the account wasn't the most important discovery. The bank had flagged one transaction because its description had been manually altered. The original transaction description said, "Noah Carter medical expense." The altered description said, "consulting." Daniel stared at the document. "Someone changed the classification." I asked, "Can they prove who?" He answered carefully, "Not yet." That meant the evidence was strong, but we needed more. I spent that weekend with Noah. We went to the park. We played basketball. We ate pizza in the living room because Rachel had once told him he wasn't allowed to eat there. He laughed when I broke the rule. For a few hours, the courtroom disappeared. Then he asked me something that broke my heart. "Dad, are you going away again?" I put the pizza down. "No." He looked at me. "Mom says the judge might make you." I swallowed. "Whatever the judge decides, I will always be your dad." He nodded. But children shouldn't have to hear their parents talk like that. I promised myself I would never use Noah as a weapon against Rachel. He deserved better than that. The next hearing became the turning point. Rachel's attorney asked me directly why I had remained silent after several allegations. Because I didn't want my son hearing his parents attack each other, I said. I believed the records would speak eventually. Isn't it true you could have challenged these claims months ago? Yes. Then why didn't you? I looked at the judge. Because I wasn't trying to win a war. I was trying to protect my son. The courtroom became completely still. Rachel looked down. Then the attorney asked, "Do you still love your wife?" I paused. I love the woman I married. I don't know the person sitting there today. It was the first emotional statement I had made in months. I expected Rachel to react. Instead, she started crying. For a moment, I wondered if something had finally broken through. Then she said something quietly to her attorney. Daniel noticed it too. After the hearing, he told me, "She's going to make one last move." I asked how he knew. Because people who have nothing left to hide stop creating distractions. The next morning, Rachel filed an emergency motion claiming I had threatened her. There was no recording, no witness, no police report, just her statement. She wanted temporary restrictions placed on me. It was a desperate attempt to change the subject again. Daniel immediately requested the court review the timing of the allegation. The judge agreed, but there was one piece of evidence we hadn't yet shown. It was the piece that had been sitting in my desk for weeks, the piece that would eventually become the envelope I carried into court. I had kept it sealed because I wanted to be absolutely certain before I used it. Inside were documents that didn't just prove I hadn't abandoned Noah. They proved someone had been deliberately manufacturing the story, and I knew that once Judge Hale saw them, there would be no way to put the old version of the case back together. The morning I brought the envelope to court, I woke before the alarm. The sky outside was gray, and the house was silent. I made coffee, but barely touched it. On the kitchen table sat the brown envelope. Nothing about it looked important. No official seal, no dramatic markings, just my handwriting across the front. For Judge Hale. Inside were certified financial records, school records, a signed statement from Noah's counselor, copies of messages, and one final document that I had spent weeks verifying. I checked the contents twice, then I called Daniel. "Everything is ready," he answered. "David, once this goes in, the case changes." I said, "That's the point." At court, Rachel arrived with her attorney. She looked confident again. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The hearing began. Her attorney gave another opening statement. He described me as controlling and secretive. He suggested that my silence was evidence of indifference. Then he said something that finally made me look up. Mr. Carter has offered no meaningful explanation for his absence from his son's daily life. Daniel stood. "We have one." Judge Hale looked toward me. "Mr. Carter?" I rose and carried the envelope forward. "Your Honor, I've listened to every allegation against me. I have not interrupted. I have not attacked Mrs. Carter. I have not spoken publicly about this case. But there is one reason I remain silent." I placed the envelope on the table. I wanted the truth to arrive in one piece. Judge Hale opened it. The first document showed my payments. The second showed my visitation. The third showed the school records. The fourth showed the altered financial classification. Then came the messages. Rachel's own words. "Once the judge believes he left voluntarily, the house becomes much easier." Judge Hale stopped reading. He looked at Rachel. "Did you write this?" Rachel said nothing. Her attorney leaned toward her. She whispered something. The judge asked again, "Mrs. Carter, did you write this message?" She finally answered, "Yes, but it was taken out of context." Daniel calmly replied, "The full conversation is included." Judge Hale continued reading. There were discussions about the house. Discussions about Noah. Discussions about making me look absent. Then he reached the final document. It was a statement from a certified forensic accountant, explaining how funds intended for Noah had been routed through Mark Ellison's consulting account. The accountant had traced the transaction chain. There was no ambiguity. The money had moved, the records had been altered, and Rachel had discussed the arrangement with Mark. The courtroom became so quiet I could hear the air conditioning system. Judge Hale leaned back. "Mrs. Carter, your testimony today conflicts with documentary evidence." Rachel began crying. I was scared. I looked at her. Scared of what? She didn't answer. Judge Hale did. That's the question this court needs answered. For the first time, Rachel's attorney had no argument ready. The judge ordered an immediate review of the financial records and suspended the pending emergency restrictions against me. He also ordered that Noah remain in his current school and that both parents participate in a formal custody evaluation. Then he turned toward Rachel. If the evidence establishes intentional deception, this court will consider consequences beyond custody. She lowered her head. I returned to my seat. But the envelope wasn't finished yet. There was one final page inside, and that page contained the name of the person who had helped Rachel build the entire false narrative. I waited until the next hearing to reveal the final page because Daniel wanted every fact independently verified. The name was Mark Ellison, Rachel's cousin, the same person whose company had received the redirected payments, the same person who had helped her prepare financial statements. But there was more. Mark had contacted the school administrator several times asking for records about my parenting schedule. He had requested information about my mortgage. He had even called one of my clients pretending to be a financial investigator. His goal was clear: gather enough information to create a picture of me as irresponsible and unstable. None of it was true. It was manufactured. When the court reviewed the evidence, Mark's involvement became impossible to ignore. Rachel's attorney withdrew from the case. The judge appointed an independent evaluator to review custody, finances, and the allegations. Rachel was ordered to stop discussing the litigation with Noah. That order mattered more to me than anything else, because throughout the entire case, the one person who had been carrying the heaviest burden was a 9-year-old boy who didn't understand why adults kept asking him questions about his father. After court, Noah ran toward me. I knelt down and hugged him. He held on tightly. "Are we going home?" he asked. I said, "We're going to get dinner." He smiled. "Pizza?" I laughed. "Pizza." On the drive, he looked out the window. Then he said, "Dad, did you really leave us?" My hands tightened around the steering wheel, but my voice stayed calm. "Noah, I never left you." He nodded. I knew it. That sentence nearly broke me. "How?" I asked. He shrugged. "Because you always came back. Children notice patterns adults overlook." He remembered every pickup, every birthday, every school event, every time I showed up even when Rachel made it difficult. The court eventually granted me primary residential custody while preserving structured parenting time for Rachel, subject to professional recommendations. The house was placed under a neutral financial arrangement until the property dispute was resolved. The redirected funds were ordered accounted for, and the court referred the financial evidence for further review. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. A family had been damaged. Trust had been shattered. Noah had been caught between adults who should have protected him from conflict. I only felt relief that the truth had finally become stronger than the story Rachel had built. Months later, Rachel asked to speak with me privately. We met in a quiet room at the courthouse. She looked exhausted. "I thought you were going to destroy me," she said. I answered, "I never wanted to destroy you." She looked confused. "Then why did you keep all that evidence?" I said, "Because when you told the court I abandoned Noah, you weren't just accusing me. You were rewriting his childhood." She looked down. I was angry. "I know. I was afraid. I know." She started crying. I thought if I didn't control everything, I would lose everything." I took a breath. "You almost did." We sat in silence. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no instant forgiveness. Some damage cannot be erased by an apology. But there was something different now. The truth was no longer buried. Noah no longer had to wonder whether his father had chosen to leave him, and that was worth more than winning any argument. A year later, the courtroom felt smaller, maybe because the fear was gone, maybe because I had learned that justice rarely looks like the movies. There was no triumphant music, no cheering crowd, no perfect ending. There were documents, hearings, evaluations, difficult conversations, therapy appointments for Noah, financial reviews, and thousands of quiet moments when a family had to learn how to live with what happened. Rachel completed the required counseling and financial review. Mark faced the consequences of his own actions after the evidence was formally examined. The house dispute was resolved through a legal agreement, and I eventually sold the property. I didn't want to live there anymore. Too many memories were attached to those walls. I bought a smaller home closer to Noah's school. His room had blue curtains, a bookshelf, and a desk covered with model airplanes. One evening, he sat beside me at the kitchen table doing homework. He looked up and said, "Dad, yeah? Are you happy now?" I smiled. "I'm getting there." He thought about it. "Me too." That was enough. The envelope that had changed everything was still in my desk. I never threw it away. Not because I wanted to remember Rachel's lies, but because I wanted to remember something else. Silence can be powerful when it is backed by truth. I had learned that anger wants immediate action. Truth doesn't. Truth can wait. It can survive being doubted. It can sit quietly inside a brown envelope while accusations fill a courtroom. And when the moment comes, truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be opened. Months after the final judgment, Judge Hale sent a brief letter through the court clerk. It wasn't about the case itself. He wrote that he had seen many families destroy themselves through bitterness, but that my decision to protect Noah from the conflict had mattered. I kept the letter too. Then one Saturday morning, Noah and I drove to the lake. We sat on the dock with our feet hanging over the water. He asked me if I ever wished I had fought harder. I thought about the question. "I wish I had protected you sooner from the things you shouldn't have had to hear," I said. "But I don't regret staying calm." He looked at the water. "Why?" I said. "Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to become the person someone else wants you to be." He smiled. "That's complicated." I laughed. "You're 9. You're not supposed to understand it yet." He splashed the water with his foot. "I understand some of it." The sun reflected across the lake, and for the first time in a long time, I felt no need to look backward. Rachel's accusation had been that I abandoned my son. The truth was almost the opposite. I had stayed when it would have been easier to walk away. I had documented when it would have been easier to explode. I had waited when everyone expected me to defend myself immediately, and when the moment came, I didn't hand the judge a weapon, I handed him facts. The envelope didn't win the case, the truth did, and Noah didn't need a perfect father, he needed one who showed up, so I kept showing up. If you're still listening, then you understand why this story was never really about the house, the money, or even the courtroom. It was about what happens when someone tries to turn a child's memory into a weapon and expects the other parent to disappear quietly. I didn't disappear. I stayed silent because I knew every unnecessary word could become another distraction. I stayed calm because Noah needed at least one parent who wasn't fighting in front of him. And when the right moment came, I let the evidence speak. The judge didn't need me to perform. He needed the truth. That brown envelope carried months of records, but it also carried something nobody could fake: consistency. Every payment, every visit, every school pickup, every medical bill, every message, every moment I showed up when someone claimed I hadn't. The most powerful part wasn't the final document. It was the pattern. A lie can be dramatic. A lie can make people cry. A lie can fill a courtroom. But a lie has to keep explaining itself. The truth usually doesn't. Noah is older now. He remembers the courtroom, but he remembers the good things more. The pizza nights, the lake, the model airplanes, the school projects, the mornings when I drove him to class and reminded him to take his lunch. That's what I wanted him to keep. Not the accusations, not the arguments, not the envelope. Just the knowledge that when life became confusing, his father stayed. So if there is one lesson I would leave you with, it is this. Never confuse silence with weakness. Sometimes silence is preparation, sometimes patience is protection, and sometimes the most powerful answer you can give is not an argument, not a threat, and not revenge. Sometimes it is one envelope placed in front of the right person at exactly the right time. Where are you watching from? Comment your city or country below. What kind of story do you want next? Military revenge, psychological thriller, or emotional family justice? And here's the question I want you to debate. If you were in my shoes, would you have stayed silent until you had undeniable evidence, or would you have fought every accusation the moment it was made? Whatever you believe, share it respectfully in the comments. Stories like this are about choices, consequences, and the moments when people decide who they want to become under pressure. Thank you for listening, and wherever life takes you next, remember to protect the people you love, stand for the truth, and never underestimate the power of staying calm when everything around you is falling apart. Until next time, stay strong, stay grounded, and take care.
हाँ जी क्या लेना है?
ऐसे नहीं होता, झूला लेना है।
कौन सा झूला लेना है? कौन सा झूला लेना है?
पापा झूला होता है।
चलो बाजी लगा के दिखाओ पहले।
झूला लेना है।
बाजी लगा के दिखाओ पहले यहाँ।
पापा
अच्छा पहले बाजी लगा के दिखाओ।
ऐसे 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 जोशी करते हैं, ऐसे ऐसे कट ब्लू। हाँ बाजी लगाओ।
ओए उधर उधर
पीछे बाजी लगाओ।
वहाँ पे लगाओ, वहाँ पे। उधर को लगाओ, उस तरफ। इधर हाँ लगाओ।
लगाओ बाजी। ऐसे ऐसे लगाओ, ऐसे 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 लगाओ।
वेरी गुड।
फिर से जोर से लगाओ।
और लगाओ आप।
जोर से।
वेरी गुड।
पापा चलो अब झूला ले।
नहीं एक और लगाओ।
पापा नहीं।
एक बाजी तो और लगाओ।
नहीं होता।
एक और लगाओ, ऐसे भी नहीं होता।
पापा एक नहीं।
अच्छा एक लगाओ फिर चलते हैं।
झूला।
एक तो लगाओ।
एक झूला।
अच्छा एक बाजी लगाओ फिर चलते हैं।
पापा एक नहीं देगी। पापा पापा देखिए कबंद।
बच्ची
पापा ना पे बंदे। पापा गन्ना पे बंदे।
बज्जी
पापा
बज्जी बुंदी पे।
ना पे बंदी पे बड्डो।
अच्छा वो सुनाओ फिर क्या पढ़ रहे थे?
मैं ना पे
क्या?
हाँ।